Hey, good morning, Jacques. How are you?
I'm doing outstanding. I'm talking to Garth Brooks.
Entering his second year as the LSU head football coach.
It was the only way I could get a foot in the door.
Joined by the icon, Kim Mulkey. Hey, Coach, great to see you.
It seems like this hire, I mean, there's no hire I guess everybody will get behind, but unlike maybe the Dennis Allen hire, where some people thought was a little lazy and just kind of convenient, this is a guy from the outside coming in with new ideas and a new take on things. Is that the way you view it?
Yeah, I think the thing, if I'm a Saints fan, that I'm kind of excited about is Kellen Moore comes from kind of outside the family, if you will. I mean, they kind of went outside their comfort zone in hiring Kellen Moore. He really has no ties to the organization whatsoever. And I think at this time, Jacques, it's needed. I mean, I think everyone is ready for something new, a breath of fresh air, new ideas, a different direction, a different vision, and certainly Kellen Moore, I think, qualifies in that regard. So I think that's why we're seeing so much excitement from the fan base right now. I think everybody's ready to see if they can get new hope for this franchise. There hasn't been a lot of hope the last few years. I think Kellen Moore brings some of that to the table.
It's professional sports where patience is very rare, but you think most fans understand he's in a tight spot. He needs a little grace, maybe he needs a little time.
Yeah, actually, I think that's the best thing that he's got going for him is he's going to have a long runway here. I don't know what the contract terms are. It's probably 4 to 5 years, and he's going to need that because this is a big job. In some ways, I think he's got a bigger challenge than when Sean Payton came in 2006, even though I know he was coming off Hurricane Katrina season, very difficult challenge there. I think in a lot of ways with the salary cap issues the Saints have, with the aging roster and with the uncertain quarterback, long-term quarterback solution, this is a big-time challenge that's going to take some time. And I think the fans are very much aware of that. And I think they're willing to be patient as long as they can see light at the end of the tunnel because there just, frankly, hasn't been that for a long time.
Yeah. Well, that's what I kind of thought. I felt whether they won or they lost, I just never felt Dennis Allen was going to take them to the next level. So if there is growing through the pain of losses next year and people can see they're better in Week 17 than they were in Week 1, that'll be encouraging.
Yeah, I think there's been too much status quo. Too much. Look, stability is one of the things the Saints pride themselves on. But when it's not working, you don't want to maintain stability and status quo. And I think that sometimes the organization is loyal to a fault, and that sometimes leads them to where they are right now. I think fans are ready for a rebuild, whether that involves 5 wins, 8 wins, or you challenge for the division title. I think in some ways this is going to have to be a complete reset of the roster and a reset of the mindset at the organization to try and build something long-term and get back to a championship vision because it just hasn't been there. It almost feels like year to year they're piecing it together just to try and keep their head above water each season. Reminds me a little bit of the Pelicans a few years back under Dell Demps, and that you're just trying to make it to the next year. There needs to be a better long-term vision here. And I think going with a young coach like Kellen Moore, 36 years old, youngest coach in the league, he's putting together a young staff. I think there's hope now that they might have a long-term plan here to build for the future.
And it starts with quarterback, and he gave a very non-committal answer about Derek Carr, if he was going to be the guy or not. It seems to be the thinking is that Saints cannot afford to cut Derek Carr. They're going to have to make the most of him one more year. Is that kind of the way it's trending?
Well, I think the reason he was non-committal is I think they want to meet with Derek Carr and sit down and talk to him, and they haven't done that yet. So to be fair to Derek Carr, to be fair to the fan base, and to be as transparent as possible, I think the process is going to involve sitting down with Derek Carr and seeing if he wants to be a part of this, and if so, can they maybe contractually come to some kind of compromise? Because right now, you make a great point, long term, they cannot keep this contract and keep Derek Carr. Their salary cap issues are too big. So maybe there's a way to meet in the middle where Derek Carr takes a pay cut, he maintains his job as a starting quarterback, and they are able to kind of bridge this transition to another quarterback down the road. But I think they need to meet with him first and see if he's willing to do that. If he's not, I think his future here is very much up in the air because I think they're going to have to do something with his contract to keep him on this roster. The thing I would say, though, is Kellen Moore is going to be the offensive coordinator here, right? I mean, he's going to call the plays. So it's difficult, I think, to hire someone in that role that's going to have a lot of status or a lot of background, because they're going to want to call their own plays here. It's very similar to the situation they had with Sean Payton, where he was the offensive coordinator, and the offensive coordinator in title only was Pete Carmichael. So I think that's always going to be difficult. And look, Doug Nussmeier is very valued in Philadelphia, and I think there's going to be a role for him there, maybe a role in a bigger role for him on that staff. So Kellen Moore's got his work cut out for him. I mean, this is not a good situation right now, league-wide. The perception is this is going to be a tough rebuild. So attracting coaches to this job is going to be difficult for him, especially because he has very little background. He has no background as a head coach. So I think that's his biggest challenge, putting together this staff.
Yeah, because when Peyton came in, the city was ravaged,
right,
and there was nobody wanted to come here. Now they don't have any money to pay anybody,
right? Yeah,
nobody can come here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think everybody knows the situation with the roster. They know the quarterback situation is not ideal, and they know that this team is probably going to take a dip down before it starts getting better. So everyone's looking for long-term stability in the coaching profession, and this right now has a lot of question marks. So if you have other options, you're more than likely going to choose another option besides New Orleans right now. That's a challenge for Kellen Moore. It was a challenge for Dennis Allen. The staff he put together here was not considered upper tier in the NFL, and I think the results kind of bear that out.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm reaching here, but Sean Payton's first year, they were supposed to be one of the worst teams ever, and they went to the NFC Championship game. So maybe there's a miracle out there.
Well, I think historically we've seen it happen in the NFL. I mean, there's lots of magical turnarounds. I mean, the way the league is built, the business model, it really feeds into parity. It feeds into teams leaping from the bottom up to the top. It happened in Washington this past year. Now, obviously that was aided by Jaden Daniels, but it happens every year where someone goes from worst to first in the division. We've seen it happen here twice. I saw it happen with Jim Haslett in 2000. Won the first playoff game in franchise history, coming off a 3-13 debacle under Mike Ditka. So it can happen, but a lot of things have to go right. And what those two situations, 2000 and 2006, had that they don't have now is they had a much clearer salary cap picture to add to the roster. That's really, I think, the big handcuff that Kellen Moore faces, is trying to put together a competitive roster with the limitations they have with the salary cap. It's just going to be very difficult.
How much of this is because of trying to win at the end of Drew Brees and kicking the can down the road a bit? Is it attached to that, or is it more recent?
No, I think that's philosophically what Mickey Loomis and the front office decided was they want to be competitive every year. They always say they need to be competitive because they have to sell out the Superdome every game. They cannot afford to have half-empty Superdome financially. This is not a bigger market, as we all know. It's one of the smaller, poorer markets in the league. Dennis Lauscher, the president, likes to say they're the Walmart of the NFL. They have to win on margins, small margins here. And so they can't afford to have a very down year. So they're always trying to maintain a competitive level of performance on the field. And sometimes I think that's one of their undoings is they've tried to just maintain, competitive level as opposed to a long-term vision of trying to rebuild a championship and just kind of tearing it down to the studs and starting over. That's really not been part of the philosophy of the Saints, and I think they may have to reconsider that, to be honest with you, because it's not working right now the way they're going.
Well, we can remember the days of energy. We bought the last 3,000 tickets or 4,000 tickets to avoid the blackout, and that's something the current or the modern day fan, they don't even know what that is. Where are they on that? Because those tickets are not cheap, and people don't have a whole lot of money, and so are they still sold out? Before the year starts? Or?
Yeah. Well, look, they'll still have a waiting list for season tickets, but that waiting list is getting shorter every year because the cost of doing business in the NFL is skyrocketing, as we all know. It makes this a very expensive proposition for the normal fan. And Saints fans have always been extremely loyal. They're probably not having the best priorities. In other words, they may be buying season tickets when they probably should be doing something else with that money, but that shows you just the passion and the support and the loyalty that the fan base has to this football team. It's very rare, and but it is becoming a difficult proposition for a lot of fans because the tickets are going up again this year, and you're coming off the worst season you've had in 2 decades. it makes it for a little difficult calculus for the normal fan to say, yes, I want to get season tickets to this Saints team when you have so many questions about the competitive level of this team compared to how much you're spending on those tickets.
Last thing, I appreciate it. I'll let you go. I was talking to Triplet last week. We were talking about Loomis, and he says there was nothing about Loomis that scared Kellen Moore away from the job in terms of he feels like he can still do his job. Now, are they in a bad pickle because of some of the decisions Loomis has made? Yes. But just your thoughts on moving forward with him. I mean, the generic thing on him has always been he knows numbers, he's brilliant with contracts, he's not a great football mind, perhaps, or knows football that well. What do you think? He's obviously not going anywhere, right? I mean, he is entrenched in this thing.
Yeah, and I would say that in many ways, Mickey Loomis is looked at as a good thing around the NFL because he's very easy to work with. He's very loyal. He gives great support to his head coaches. Sean Payton will be the first to tell you that. Sean Payton still considers Mickey Loomis his best friend in the NFL, all those years they were together. But having said that, I mean, they're in a pickle in a lot of ways because of the decisions that Mickey Loomis has made, in particular with the salary cap, roster management, and the philosophy that they've had to, as you say, to kick the can down the road. So it's made Kellen Moore's job even more difficult the way they've managed it under Mickey Loomis. But know this about Mickey Loomis: he's very competitive. He doesn't always show it behind that facade, though. He is very disappointed with the way things have gone, and he wants to be part of the solution. He feels, I think, personally responsible for how things went under Dennis Allen. He hired Dennis Allen, after all. So I think he wants to see this through and get the organization back into a winning mode before he were to consider stepping aside or maybe retiring or moving into a new role. It's not the time that he wants to walk out right now. He wants to walk out with this organization in better standing. And so I think until that happens, he's going to be a part of this organization going forward.
And just real quick about like the NFL draft, for example. The Saints have hit on like 2 drafts in the last, 2006 and 2017. Look how much winning they did on those 2 drafts. Just imagine if they drafted 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, and here's what I say. I'm a big fan of Jeff Ireland. He's highly regarded around the league. He runs all the Saints drafts. He's very well respected as a talent evaluator. I think they might actually have better players that they've drafted the last few years than have maybe performed under this old coaching staff. I think there's some optimism. If you're a Saints fan, it happens a lot in this league where you see a player who might be labeled a bust because they haven't performed very well under one staff, and then another staff comes in and realizes some of that untapped potential. Zach Bond's a great example. Everyone thought Zach Bond was a bust. You would have labeled him as a bust here. He was a draft pick by the New Orleans Saints, and now he's a first-team All-Pro. I'd say that was a good draft pick, but no one would have said that last year when he was with New Orleans. So I think sometimes players can get buried in the incompetence around them, and we could see some players that have been recent draft picks of Jeff Ireland and the Saints shine under Kellen Moore and this new staff because they'll have a fresh set of eyes on them, maybe find the right button to push on a player. So we'll see if this goes forward. I don't think Jeff Ireland is one of the problems. I think he's actually one of their greatest assets.
And Hendrickson, they just didn't have the money at the time. It's not like they wanted him to leave, right? They just didn't have enough money to, because they were still paying Breeze at that time, I think.
Well, but that also goes back. I would argue they had the money. They just made a decision on who they wanted to keep. And at the time, they elected to keep Marcus Williams on a franchise tag at safety instead of the young edge rusher. And I've been told around the league, you never let a great young edge rusher go, especially when you drafted and helped develop over those years. I think it was a bad mistake by the front office in terms of evaluating a player. You had him in the building, and now he's a first-team Pro Bowler, multi-year Pro Bowler. That's a big mistake that's kind of frankly led them down the path of where they're at right now.
Was Rob Nimkovich? How was his
Nimkovich.
name? He was an edge rusher too?
Yeah.
That was what Peyton said. That was one of those big mistakes he made.
Yeah, he says the worst personnel mistake of his career. One of the things I loved about Sean Payton was he was not afraid to admit when he made mistakes. But yes, young, talented defensive players like Zach Bond, Trey Hendrickson, you drafted. Alex Anzalone, I'll throw him in there as well, one of the top linebackers in the league. These are draft picks by the New Orleans Saints that are now performing well elsewhere. This will harken back to the days, the pre-Peyton Breeze days, where the organization would routinely have other players that they drafted go on to other organizations and perform much better than when they were here. That's a bad sign. That's a sign of dysfunction, something they've got to get a handle on if they want to get back to being competitive.